Hello there, welcome back to my channel. Today I have a 2-page outdoor adventure scrapbook layout that's part of an 8-part series where I'm on a mission to use up scraps and leftovers. Last month I had a huge project where I had to create an enormous amount of these buckle cards. I love the buckle. On the flip side of the buckle is the sentiment. Then you can open up the flap of the card and add a personal message. I used the Weekend Adventure Designer Series paper and the Scenic Adventure stamp and die set. I love them and they were a hit, but look at all the strips that I have left over. If you're like me, you probably tuck them in a great envelope, store them away nice and neatly, and then forget about them. I decided that I was going to be on a mission to use up every single scrap. I'm going to start right out of the gate with my granddaughter, Avery Jean. Avery Jean is the oldest daughter of my only daughter, and she's a typical firstborn. She has 2 younger sisters, but she is fearless. She's a climber, she's athletic, she's thoughtful, and she has so many skills, but despite her skills, she's very humble and kind. I just love watching how her brain works and how adventurous and fearless she is. So she's going to get the first layout out of 8, and then each of my grandchildren is going to be featured in a different layout in the series of 8. Each of these layouts is going to be a real easy go-to layout, a layout that I've probably used in the past that is a great way to use up scraps. So this first one, I'm going to start with 2 12 by 12 black bases, a 10 1/4 by 10 1/4 Cajun Craze layer, and then a 10 by 10 Willow white layer. Using an edge distresser, I'm going to distress all the edges because it's an outdoor layout, and I want to make sure that I kind of do some deeper gouges, out of the paper. I don't want it to be just perfect all the way around. And as I usually do with all outdoor layouts, I will dirty up all the edges with pecan pie ink. So using a mini ink blending tool, I'm going to dirty up all those edges and make them look rustic and outdoor and roughed up a little bit. I won't put you through all of the inking. I'll just get started here and show you how I'm going around all the edges with the pecan pie. And then I'll do that off camera. I'm going to layer all of those together, line up the gouges or the notches, and then add that to the base. I'm super excited to continue on in the Weekend Adventure series. Now, you would think that we would have enough Weekend Adventure or enough Outdoor Adventure pages because last week I revealed 39 pages that I created with this paper or this theme, and I had so much fun with it. But you would not believe how many people need so many outdoor, masculine, they need Father's Day, they need hiking, they need camping, they need fishing, they need nature walks, they need travel. So I feel like even though we're continuing on in that series and we've made so many pages, it's going to be perfect to be able to use up my scraps. I'm going to be doing lots of go-to layouts that are really easy to case, really easy to duplicate, that you can use any strips and scraps for. So I'm adding cardstock photo mats here. I have Old Olive and I have Early Espresso. The Old Olive is 3.5 by 4.5, 2 of them. The Early Espresso is 3.25 by 4.25, 2 of them. The Willow White is 3.125 by 4.125, 2 of them. And then, of course, the photos are vertical 3 by 4. So I'll have the close-up of Avery Jean closer to us, and then the one where she's higher up on the mountain in the background. Over on the right, we're making a traditional grid, and we're going to be using 3 by 3 cardstock pieces to start out with, and then the Willow White will be 2 7/8 by 2 7/8, And then the interior is going to be the photos. The ones that have photos are going to be 2 3/4 by 2 3/4. And over on this left-hand side, I've trimmed down some of that big stack of strips that I have left over to 1.5 by 7 inches. And I'm just going to rearrange the patterns that I like the best. I first think that I'm going to use a different pattern for each strip, and then I decide to choose 3 and duplicate the 3 that I like the best that go with the cardstock colors over on the right. Now, one of my recent videos where I talked about a grid, I got a couple questions from brand new scrapbookers about what's a grid. A grid is a go-to style scrapbook page where you have a block of squares or a block of shapes, they don't have to be squares, that stack together, and they either can hold the photos themselves or they can be used as the background. So you can have like a 4-part grid, a 6-part grid, a 9-part grid, a 12-part grid. You can have all different kinds of grids, and a grid style layout is a simple go-to for beginning scrapbooking. You can use it for elevated scrapbooking, and it's a great way to use up scraps because typically in a grid style, you have just a few squares that have decorative elements or pattern papers, and the rest of the parts of the grid can be photos. So you can see that I'm using 6 photos on a 9-part grid. That means 3 of those pieces of that grid will probably have decorative elements. So as you know, I don't have any bigger pieces, so I'm actually going to use Willow White on the interior, and again, that's 2 7/8 on the interior, and then I have some little tiny pieces that I cut off of the leftover strips. 1 3/8 by 2 3/4. And of course, the Scenic Adventure stamp and die set will work perfect. There's trees, there's little mountains, there's even a teeny tiny campfire that I love so much. So I'm going to go ahead and start by putting the grid together over on the right. Now, I'm a little bit lazy, especially when I'm using up my scraps and I'm just making some very easy go-to layouts. I don't want to be laborious and just measure every little piece. Now you can. If you're one of those people that you like everything to be neat as a pin, go ahead and measure this out. But what I like to do is start with the spacing of the corners, get the corner spacing right, then I can put the middle together and it'll fit perfectly that way. I might have to lift up a few pieces after I get the middle in place if I see that it isn't quite in line, and that's why I use repositionable adhesive so that you have a little bit of give right away and then it turns permanent after a while. If you wait too long, you can't pull it back up, but if you're working with it right away and you need to reposition something, I love having a repositionable tape runner. You can have these squares any random color that you want, but I kind of wanted to focus and have all of the center squares the same color. So now I have the white willow pieces in the center, and I have the little pattern paper pieces that may or may not go on the center of those. And I want to arrange my strips from the left-hand side all in a row, maybe wonky and maybe back to back, but I'm going to draw a line here because I think a sideways title with a sideways scene might be really cool. So there's this cool stamp in Scenic Adventures, and I'm going to try to get by with just using Scenic Adventures, using scraps and 1 stamp and die set if possible. I really want this to be easy to put together. I want it to be a go-to layout, and I really want to use up what I have. So I love how it says "You're amazing," because that's exactly what Avery Jean is. I'm going to use some Tuxedo Black Memento ink, and I'm going to ink up my stamp, and I want it more over to the middle or the right so that I can create some little icons on the left corner. And it's going to be great for a title. There's so many other cool things that you can say in this, like let the journey begin, adventures, just breathe, cheers to another adventure. There's so many combinations, and I think I could do some little wordy bits over on the right on the grid and still be able to add some decorative elements. So I think on this first one, I'm going to say cheers to another adventure because Avery Jean is on an adventure. One thing about Avery Jean is she's always up for an adventure, and she's almost always in a very, very good mood. And I love that about her. She's always up for something, like why not? Her mother was a lot that way. Gosh, I'd have to do the math, but I think my daughter's 35. She's the middle child. I think 35. Gosh, it's terrible. I'm getting old and I have to count how old my kids are on my fingers and my toes. But I think she's 35. But when she was 11, which is how old Avery Jean is in these photos, she climbed to the top of Devil's Tower. Now, Devil's Tower is in Wyoming, and it's a huge national landmark. And she of course was with a guide, with ropes and safety harnesses and all of that. But I think it took the better part of a half a day. And I was just so scared. And she was so adventurous and so brave. She went with her dad, thank goodness, and they climbed all the way to the top. And Avery Jean reminds me of her mother, of my daughter, Emily. They're both so adventurous. So now I've taken some more cardstock and created some go-to tags. If you follow me and you've followed my channel, you know that I make lots of handmade tags, and they are a very easy go-to. So I made these tags at 2.5 inches wide, and you can trim them off and have them as long or as short as you want to have them. I always cut off a corner, flip that corner over, use the flipped over corner on the opposite side so it makes the perfect tag top every time. I do have a variety of tag top punches, some that are slits, some that have little rounded pieces. You can simply use a hole punch. If you don't have a hole punch or a tag punch, you can just put a dot or a gem there to signify where the top of that tag would be or the tag hole would be. So I'm going to go ahead and add the pecan pie ink to those so that it matches the rest of the layout, and then we can layer those tags over here, and we can maybe build what in my mind I'm thinking we can build a little mountain scene with the stamps and dies from Scenic Adventure. And then maybe we'll add a little ribbon, or we'll add a little burlap or twine to the tops of those tags later on. I'll probably be making more tags because we'll probably want to balance out the pages and maybe have a few more of those tags on the right, or maybe have a few of those tags behind the photo. Now I've added foam tape to the back of the front photo of Avery Jean because I'm going to have a lot to say about Avery Jean. I want to talk about each grandchild in each of these layouts in the 8-part series, and so I'm going to make it hidden journaling. So you can see how I just put a strip of adhesive or foam tape under the left, right, and bottom, so it creates a pocket up underneath the photo. So then I've created a journal box on my Microsoft Word, and I've typed into it, and it's 2 3/4 by 3 3/4 where I've left a little bit of an edge. And then I'm going to create a 2 3/4 inch black tag to put up underneath that journal bit so that I have a piece that will stick up above the photo, and I can add something to that and be able to pull that journaling out. Now I can layer some tags underneath, so I'll use that same tag as my guide, and I'll make a Cajun Craze tag that I can put under there, and maybe even another one, or maybe that's enough. Maybe I'll add some trees from the Scenic Adventure dies behind that and do a little fun layering behind those strips. So So now I have a little bit of something that helps that stand out where I have the Cajun Craze tag behind it. So I think also I will grab out, optional, a white gel pen. So this is a 0.8 white gel pen. I use black journal pens, white gel pens. I use those a lot to add different little bits and pieces around layouts when I don't have a lot of fancy backgrounds left. If I'm using a cardstock background and I feel like I want to jazz up that background a little bit, I'll add journaling lines all the way around, or little lines with a journal pen all the way around. Sometimes I'll make them squiggly, sometimes I'll make them straight, and just that little bit helps the layout to stand out a little bit. You can do that to the tops of tags, around the edges of things. You can even do that around the edges of stickers and die cut pieces just to add a little extra element. So now with the Scenic Adventure stamp and die set, there is a big mountain and a little mountain. And it's kind of an interesting die because it can actually cut out of a square but not cut out the mountain all the way. It just makes a little piece that can pop up and almost be 3D if you add foam behind it. Now you can cut off the bottom like I did, or you can leave it all one piece and tuck the little mountain inside the bigger mountain and make it look like layered mountains. Now I made some of the little mountains or hills out of the light side, so I'm using two-tone early espresso cardstock, and I made some of them out of the dark side and some of them out of the light side, so that when you layer those together you have a little bit of depth and you can distinguish the difference between the hills that are in the front and the hills that are in the back. And I'm just envisioning having some rolling hills underneath this title, and then maybe adding a few little trees to that as well to create this nice little scene off to the side. I know that it'll be sideways, but I think I'm going to like that. I think it's going to be different and unique and kind of cool. If you don't like that, you could definitely create this scene at the top of the layout. There's plenty of space up at the top, or you could reposition your 1.5 by 7 inch strips. You could move those down just a little bit and create your tags and your scene up at the top. I just wanted something a little bit unique and a little bit different. Now over on the right, since I have the mountains out, I'm going to create a couple more of those mountain cutouts. So I created a couple small ones and one large one, and I'm just going to trim those out so that they're the same size as the little pattern paper piece there, and create another little mountain scene and probably put some of the Scenic Adventure trees in them. The beauty of a go-to grid is you can decorate the squares only a little bit, or you can decorate the squares a lot, or you can add all photos. So let's say you have, and you really, really want 3 more photos. You could add 3 more photos in the decorative spots. Also, if you're using a traditional size photo, which I'm not, and the reason I'm not is I went smaller than a 3 by 3, so 2 3/4 by 2 3/4, because I wanted a really wide outer background. But if you hadn't have gone really wide with the outer background, you could have a larger inner piece and you could very easily fit full-size 3 by 3s in your grid, and then you could use 3 by 3 flip-flaps. You can, however, on the left page, use 3 by 4 flip-flaps on those photos. So now I've created some of those trees from the Scenic Adventure stamp and die set, some big ones and some little ones, with the true side of Old Olive and the light side of Old Olive. And you could also use Mossy Meadow. So if you're using solid cardstock, you could maybe just go with a darker cardstock like Mossy Meadow, and then use Old Olive for your light if you prefer to use solid core cardstock. So I'm just going to play around and tuck a few little trees up into those mountains and have it hug the title that says "You're Amazing." I see myself probably adding some ink with a blending brush around that title to make that title stand out a little bit more. And I love this little bitty fire. It's so cute. teeny tiny little campfire that I can add up there between the wordy bits. And then there's this longer piece as well. It's really similar to the other dies where it doesn't cut out all the way. It just kind of cuts part way, and you can trim it. Or if you want it to be at the top of a rectangle or the top of a square and you don't want to cut it out, you can absolutely do that as well. But I see myself layering a few of those skinny trees over the top of the hiking paper and adding the sentiment, just breathe and take it slow. I like the concept that we have a triangle here. So we have over on the left-hand side, on the left page, we have a cluster in the title. We can go up across that page to Cheers to Another Adventure, and then our eye can go all the way down to Just Breathe, and it helps our eyes cross in a triangle to go across all the photos and all of the photos on the left page and the photos on the right page to really feature those photos. If you want to feature journaling, you can do a visual triangle around the journaling. If you want to feature the photos, you can do a visual triangle around the photos. So now I realized that I started putting trees and mountains and bits all on the pages without inking them with pecan pie. I could have just left it, but you be the judge. You tell me if you think it looks much better with the pecan pie inking than it did without. I really do think it helps all the bits and pieces stand out and look so pretty and so rustic, and it just gives it a nice little outdoorsy and country tone. So now I have all my layers, and what we do to one, we should do to the other. So I really didn't have any tags over on the right, so I went ahead and duplicated those same tags that I made over on the left. Only a tiny little bit is going to show. So you really don't have to cut very large cardstock pieces. You can cut those tags at 2.5, just like I did on the left page, and then just make them tall enough to fit right up under the lip there to really tie in the tags. Now I'm going to bring out the Cajun Craze, and the jury is out on this. I kind of wanted to do Cajun Craze ink blending here for a different color because we have a lot of green in there already. And then when I see it, I'm like, I don't know, maybe I should have went with traditional green. I do add a little bit of green in the old olive on the left, and I leave the Cajun Craze just the way it is on the right. So if you don't like the Cajun Craze hue there, you can do old olive and have a nice little green hue there. The green is usually what I always use, and sometimes I just want to shake it up a little bit. So now I want to make some little knots. I made some knots with some black and white gingham ribbon, and I put those on the black tags, and I snipped in the middle of some of our burlap ribbon and shredded the little strings of burlap out and just tied them together and made some little burlap notches. Now, typically I would use my textured dots on a layout like this, but I accidentally grabbed my floral motif dots. And so they look great. It's okay. You could use black dots, you can use textured dots, you can use metal, anything like that would go great. Browns, any of the browns and the neutral matte dots would go great with this outdoor layout. I am getting happy. I'm happy for multiple reasons. One is I love featuring my granddaughter Avery Jean. I love that I'm on my way to using up all of my scrap strips. I love that I've shared with you a go-to layout that you can use with any leftover strips, and it uses very little pattern paper but makes a beautiful layout. I love the hidden journaling where I've told the story about my fearless granddaughter Avery Jean. I really hope you've been inspired and that you'll hit like, subscribe, and the notifications bell, and be sure to come back for the last 7 layouts in this 8-part series where I use up all of my scraps to create outdoor adventure layouts. See you soon. Bye-bye.